The sound of my 1947 Chateau d'Yquem hitting the flagstone terrace shattered the warm September evening air like gunfire, followed immediately by Madison Kane's shriek of laughter as $10,000 worth of liquid gold spread across the stones I'd laid with my own hands 23 years ago. "Oh my God, Derek, your gardener is going to have such a mess to clean up," she giggled, wobbling in her designer heels as she gestured vaguely toward the expanding puddle of what had once been one of the finest dessert wines ever produced. "Good thing we opened like 6 more bottles of this dusty old stuff. Who even drinks wine from the 1940s anyway? It's probably all vinegar by now." I stood frozen in the doorway of my own wine cellar, the climate-controlled sanctuary that had taken me 15 years to curate and another 8 to perfect, watching my son's fiancé treat my life's work like party favors at a college keg party. Around her, a crowd of 150 guests milled about my vineyard's main terrace, consuming food that cost more per plate than most people spent on groceries in a month, drinking wines that represented decades of careful collecting and investment, and celebrating an engagement that had apparently been planned without any consideration for the woman who owned every vine, every building, and every irreplaceable bottle they were currently destroying. "Madison, maybe you should slow down a little," Derek suggested weakly from his position near the bar, where he was allowing the catering staff to serve my 1982 Bordeaux as if it were house wine. "That bottle it was pretty expensive." "Expensive?" Madison laughed again, the sound carrying across my terraces like fingernails on chalkboard. "Derek, honey, when we inherit this place, we'll have so much money that expensive wine will be like buying water. Besides, old wine is just old wine. I've already talked to that party planner in Napa about turning this whole property into a premium wedding venue. We could charge like $50,000 per event and make way more than selling dusty bottles to wine snobs. Inherit this place." The words hit me like ice water as I realized that my son had apparently been telling his fiancée that my vineyard, the 120-acre property I'd spent 25 years developing from raw land into one of Sonoma County's most respected boutique wineries, was some kind of family asset that would automatically transfer to him upon my death. "The gardener can clean this up," Madison continued, nudging the broken glass with her Louboutin heel and looking around for someone to handle the mess she'd created. "Where is she anyway? I told her earlier that these flower arrangements were all wrong, and she just gave me this weird look like she didn't understand English." Derek's face flushed red as several guests turned to stare at Madison's casual dismissal of what she clearly believed was hired help. "Madison, keep your voice down," he muttered, glancing around nervously. "People are listening." "So what? Derek, we need to establish boundaries with the staff right from the beginning. I've been reading about wedding planning, and all the experts say you have to be firm with vendors and employees or they'll walk all over you." The staff, the employees, the gardener. I pressed my back against the stone wall of my wine cellar, trying to process what I was hearing. For the past 6 months, since Derek had announced his engagement and begun bringing Madison to family gatherings, I'd noticed her treating me with a casual dismissiveness that I'd attributed to generational differences, or perhaps social awkwardness. She'd never asked about my background, my involvement in the vineyard's operations, or my relationship to the property beyond what Derek had apparently told her, which, based on what I was overhearing, had been precisely nothing. "Derek, seriously, we need to talk to your mom about updating this whole operation," Madison continued, gesturing expansively at the terraces where my carefully cultivated grapevines stretched toward the hills in perfectly organized rows. "This whole rustic farmhouse aesthetic is so 2010. When we take over, we should modernize everything, maybe add a spa, definitely upgrade the tasting room to something more Instagram-worthy. When we take over. Madison, maybe this isn't the right time to discuss. And honestly, the gardener needs better training in hospitality. I asked her to move some tables earlier, and she acted like I was speaking a foreign language. I know she's probably been here forever, but if we're going to run a premium venue business, we need staff who understand customer service." I stepped out of the shadows and walked slowly toward the group gathered around Madison, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and disbelief. 25 years of building this vineyard from nothing. 25 years of learning viticulture, developing winemaking expertise, establishing relationships with distributors, and creating a brand that sommeliers throughout California recognized for quality and consistency. 25 years of work that my son's fiancé had apparently dismissed as inherited property managed by hired gardeners. "Excuse me," I said quietly, approaching the group with the kind of calm that comes from shock so profound it creates its own protective numbness. Madison turned toward me, with the impatient expression she might give a waitress who'd interrupted an important conversation. "Oh, there you are," she said with exaggerated patience. "Listen, I need you to clean up this mess," she gestured toward the shattered wine bottle, "and bring us some decent champagne instead of these ancient bottles that taste like museum pieces." "These ancient bottles," I repeated slowly. "Right, exactly. I don't know who told Derek that old wine was supposed to be good, but honestly, we opened a bottle from 1961 earlier, and it was just gross, like drinking liquid leather. Bring us some Cristal or Dom Perignon, something that actually tastes good." The 1961 bottle she was describing was a Chateau Latour that had cost me $4,000 at auction 3 years ago. I'd been saving it for a special occasion, planning to open it when Derek announced his engagement. Instead, my son's fiancé had apparently consumed it like grocery store wine while complaining about its age and authenticity. I'll see what I can find," I managed. "Great. And when you're done with that, can you do something about the lighting out here? It's way too dim for photos. This whole setup needs to be Instagrammable if we're going to use it for our wedding content." Derek was standing approximately 10 feet away, close enough to hear every word of his fiancé's casual condescension toward his mother, saying absolutely nothing. "Derek," I said, my voice carefully controlled, "could I speak with you privately for a moment? Mom, we're kind of in the middle of the party right now. Can it wait?" "Mom." The word hung in the air between us as Madison's head snapped up with surprise, her expression shifting from impatience to confusion as she processed the implication of what Derek had just said. "Mom?" she repeated, looking between Derek and me with growing alarm. "Derek, what are you talking about? Why are you calling the gardener Mom?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the evening breeze rustling through my Cabernet Sauvignon vines 50 yards away. "Madison," Derek said carefully, his voice tight with the kind of panic that comes from realizing you've created a problem that can't be easily fixed. "I think we need to talk." "Talk about what? Derek, why did you just call the gardener your mother?" "Because," I said quietly, my voice carrying across the terrace with perfect clarity, "I am his mother, and this isn't just any vineyard you've been planning to modernize and convert into a wedding venue." "What do you mean?" "I mean, this is my vineyard, my property. My wine collection that you've been treating like party favors. My 25 years of work that you've been dismissing as outdated decoration. Some engagement parties end with toasts, dancing, and plans for future celebration. This engagement party was about to end with a revelation that would force everyone present, especially Madison Kane, to reconsider everything they thought they knew about property ownership, family dynamics, and the consequences of treating people as if their worth is determined by their perceived status rather than their actual position in the world. And I was about to discover whether my son had deliberately allowed his fiancée to humiliate his mother, or whether he'd simply been too cowardly to correct her assumptions about who actually owned everything she'd been planning to inherit. Madison's face cycled through expressions like a slot machine, landing on different combinations: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally something that looked dangerously close to panic as she began to process the implications of what I'd just revealed. "Your vineyard?" she repeated, her voice rising an octave. "Derek, what is she talking about? You said this was family property." "It is family property," Derek replied weakly, avoiding eye contact with both of us. "I never said it wasn't Mom's vineyard. You never said it was your mother's vineyard either." Madison's voice carried across the terrace, drawing stares from nearby guests who were beginning to sense drama more entertaining than the jazz trio I'd hired for background ambiance. "You told me this place belonged to the family and that we'd inherit it eventually." "Madison, keep your voice down," Derek pleaded, glancing around at the growing audience of wedding guests, business associates, and family friends who were witnessing what was rapidly becoming the most uncomfortable engagement party in Sonoma County history. "Don't tell me to keep my voice down. Derek, I've spent 6 months planning our wedding here, talking about renovations and business plans, treating your mother like hired help because you never bothered to mention that she owns this entire operation. I watched my son's face flush deep red as he realized the magnitude of the situation he'd created through his passive dishonesty. For 6 months, he'd allowed Madison to interact with me as if I were an employee rather than the property owner, apparently preferring to avoid difficult conversations about family dynamics rather than correct her increasingly presumptuous behavior. Mrs. Blackstone, Madison turned to me with desperate politeness. I am so sorry. I had no idea. Derek never explained the ownership situation properly. No, he didn't, I agreed, studying my son's expression as he struggled to find words that might minimize his culpability in this debacle. I mean, when Derek brought me here for family dinners and you were always in the kitchen or working in the gardens, I just assumed. I mean, you're always dressed so casually, and you never mentioned owning anything. Because I don't typically feel the need to announce my property ownership to establish credibility with guests in my own home. Madison's face went white as she realized how her explanation was making things worse rather than better. That's not what I meant. Derek always talked about inheriting the vineyard eventually, so I thought maybe it belonged to his father or grandparents or something. It belonged to my late husband Richard and me. Now it belongs to me, entirely and exclusively. Oh God, Madison whispered, looking around at the 150 guests who were consuming what she now realized was my wine, my food, and my hospitality, while she had spent the evening treating me like domestic staff. Derek, why didn't you tell me? Because every time I tried to bring up family finances or property ownership, you changed the subject or said we'd discuss it after the wedding, Derek replied defensively. You seemed more interested in planning the party than understanding the details. The details? Derek, this isn't a detail. This is your mother's business, her home, her life's work, and I've been... Madison's voice broke as the full scope of her behavior began to sink in. Oh my God, Mrs. Blackstone, I've been ordering you around like you worked for me. Yes, you have. And I broke that wine bottle and told you to clean it up. A $10,000 bottle of 1947 Chateau d'Yquem. Yes, $10,000? Madison's voice was barely audible. Derek, you said it was just old wine that probably wasn't worth much anymore. I said what? Derek's expression shifted from embarrassment to alarm as he realized Madison was about to reveal more about their private conversations regarding my wine collection. You said old wine loses value over time and that most of the bottles in the cellar were probably worth less than modern vintages. You said your mom was sentimental about keeping them, but that we'd probably want to sell the collection and use the money for renovations. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I processed this information. Not only had Derek failed to correct Madison's assumptions about my status, he'd actively encouraged her dismissive attitude toward my wine collection, a collection that represented not just significant financial investment, but 30 years of shared passion between Richard and me. Derek, I said quietly, is that really what you told her about my wine collection? Mom, I was just trying to help Madison understand that some of those bottles are really old and might not taste as good as newer wines. You told me they were worthless antiques, Madison interjected, apparently realizing that Derek was minimizing his role in her misconceptions. You said your mother was hoarding bottles that would be better replaced with modern vintages that guests would actually enjoy. Worthless antiques, I repeated, looking at my son with an expression that made him take an involuntary step backward. I never used those exact words. Derek, you absolutely did. You said we should donate them to charity for the tax write-off and stock the cellar with wines that people actually want to drink. The crowd around us had grown larger as word spread that something dramatic was unfolding near the wine cellar. I could see faces I recognized from the local wine community, restaurant owners, collectors, and industry professionals who understood exactly what Madison had just admitted to destroying. Mrs. Blackstone, said James Morrison, the sommelier from Healdsburg's most prestigious restaurant, did I hear correctly that someone broke a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem? You heard correctly. And consumed a 1961 Chateau Latour? Also correct. James winced visibly. I hope you have insurance on your collection. Some of it, though insurance doesn't replace the sentimental value of wines that my late husband and I collected together over 30 years. Wait, Madison interrupted, her voice rising with new panic. If that wine was worth $10,000, how much was the 1961 bottle worth? The Chateau Latour 1961? Approximately $4,000. $4,000! Derek, you said it tasted bad because it was old. It tasted bad because you don't have the palate to appreciate a wine of that caliber, James observed with professional bluntness. A 1961 Latour is one of the finest Bordeaux vintages ever produced. Describing it as tasting like leather suggests a complete inability to distinguish complexity from simplicity. Madison turned back to me with tears starting to form in her eyes. Mrs. Blackstone, I've destroyed $14,000 worth of wine? So far, though I haven't tallied the complete damage yet. Oh God, Derek, we have to pay for this. We have to make this right. Madison, we don't have $14,000 to spend on replacing wine, Derek said quietly, finally acknowledging the financial reality of their situation. Then we'll get a loan. We'll figure it out. Mrs. Blackstone, please tell me how to fix this. I looked at my son, who was staring at the ground with the expression of someone who just realized that his attempts to avoid difficult conversations had created consequences far more serious than the original discussions would have been. Derek, why don't you explain to Madison exactly what you told her about inheriting this property? Mom, can we discuss this privately? No. She's planning her wedding here based on assumptions you apparently encouraged. She deserves to understand the actual ownership situation. Some engagement parties feature awkward moments when families get to know each other better. This engagement party was featuring the complete destruction of assumptions that had shaped Madison's relationship with our family for 6 months, while my son discovered that dishonesty through omission could be more damaging than honest conversations about complex topics. And I was beginning to understand that the woman I'd been tolerating as Derek's temporary romantic distraction had actually been planning to inherit my life's work while treating me like hired help, with my own son's implicit encouragement. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds as Derek stood frozen, apparently searching for words that might minimize the magnitude of his deception without making the situation worse. Around us, the engagement party continued with an increasingly surreal quality. Guests pretending to focus on conversations and appetizers while obviously straining to hear every word of what had become the evening's main entertainment. Derek, Madison said with dangerous quiet, what exactly did you tell me about inheriting this vineyard? I told you it was family property that would eventually transition to the next generation. Transition how? When? Under what circumstances? Madison, I don't think this is the right time. This is exactly the right time. Derek, I've spent 6 months making plans based on information you gave me about our future. I need to know what's true and what's not. I watched my son struggle with the conversation he should have had months ago, wondering how many other aspects of their relationship were built on convenient omissions rather than honest communication. The vineyard will probably, eventually, become part of my inheritance, Derek said carefully, each word chosen to avoid commitment to specific details. Probably? I interjected. Derek, when did I tell you that you would inherit this property? Well, you didn't explicitly say. I didn't say anything at all about inheritance, explicit or otherwise. In fact, I've been very clear that my estate planning isn't finalized and depends on numerous factors, including my assessment of your maturity and judgment. Your assessment of his maturity and judgment? Madison repeated, looking between Derek and me with growing alarm. What does that mean? It means that inheritance isn't automatic, I replied. It's earned through demonstrating responsibility, respect for family assets, and ability to manage significant financial obligations. Derek's face had gone pale. Mom, you always said the vineyard would stay in the family. I said I hoped it would stay in the family. I never said it would automatically transfer to you regardless of your behavior or decision-making capabilities. Madison stared at Derek with an expression that suggested she was recalculating everything she thought she knew about their financial future. Derek, you told me we'd inherit this place outright. You said your mother was getting older and would want to retire soon and turn operations over to us. I said that was probably what would happen eventually. No, you said that was definitely what would happen. You said it was just a matter of timing. Madison, you're misremembering. I'm not misremembering anything. Derek, I have text messages from you about converting the guest cottage into our permanent residence and turning the main house into event space. You sent me real estate listings for comparable properties to show me how much money we'd make renovating this place for weddings and corporate retreats. The revelation that Derek had been actively planning to commercialize my property hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent 25 years building this vineyard as a combination business venture and family legacy, and my son had apparently been calculating its commercial redevelopment value without my knowledge or consent. "Derek," I said very quietly, "you've been researching commercial conversion of my property?" "Mom, I was trying to understand the business potential." "The business potential of property you don't own and have never been promised? You've always said you wanted the vineyard to be profitable and sustainable for future generations." "I've said I wanted it to remain a family vineyard producing quality wine, not that I wanted it converted into a wedding venue operated by children who can't distinguish between a $4,000 bottle of Bordeaux and grocery store wine." James Morrison, who was still listening with professional fascination, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Mrs. Blackstone, if you don't mind my asking, how extensive is your vintage collection? Because if these young people have been treating museum-quality wines as party refreshments, approximately 500 bottles ranging from 1940s French Bordeaux to 1990s California Cabernet, with total collection value around $2.8 million. The number hit the surrounding crowd like a thunderclap. Conversation stopped completely as guests processed the information that Madison had been casually consuming wines worth more than most people's houses. $2.8 million? Madison whispered. "Derek, you told me the wine collection was worth maybe $50,000 total. I estimated based on what I thought old wine might be worth." "You estimated? Derek, you didn't research anything? You just guessed about millions of dollars in assets?" "Madison, I didn't know it was worth that much. Mom never talks about money or asset values. Because I don't discuss my financial affairs with people who haven't demonstrated the maturity to handle that information responsibly," I replied. And based on tonight's evidence, my caution was justified. Patricia Wells, a wine journalist I'd known for 15 years, approached our group with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed a natural disaster. "Victoria, please tell me they haven't damaged any of the pre-war Burgundies." "They opened a 1943 Romanée Conti about an hour ago. Madison's friends were mixing it with sparkling water because they thought it was too strong." Patricia actually gasped. "The 1943 Romanée Conti? Victoria, that bottle was worth at least $30,000. It's one of the last vintages before phylloxera destroyed the original vines." $30,000? Madison's voice cracked completely. "Derek, how much wine have we destroyed tonight?" Derek was staring at me with the expression of someone who just realized that his casual assumptions about family assets were catastrophically incorrect. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me how valuable the collection was? Why didn't you ever ask? Why didn't you ever show enough interest in my work to learn about viticulture, winemaking, or collection management? Because I thought it was just a hobby that had gotten out of hand." "A hobby?" My voice rose for the first time all evening. "Derek, this vineyard produces 15,000 cases annually with distribution throughout California and the Pacific Northwest. This is a multi-million-dollar agricultural and hospitality business, not a retirement hobby." Madison sank into one of the terrace chairs, apparently overwhelmed by the scope of her misconceptions. "Mrs. Blackstone, what happens now? How can we possibly fix this?" "That depends on several factors," I replied, looking at Derek with disappointment that felt like physical weight in my chest, "including whether my son is willing to acknowledge that his dishonesty created this situation, and whether you're both prepared to face the actual consequences of treating family assets and family relationships as disposable conveniences." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that involve understanding that some damage can't be undone, some trust can't be rebuilt, and some opportunities don't get second chances." James Morrison leaned closer to Patricia Wells and whispered something that carried clearly in the evening air. "I've never seen a family fortune get destroyed by a single engagement party before. Some engagement parties end with families bonding over shared celebration. This engagement party was ending with revelations that would force everyone present to reconsider what they thought they knew about wealth, inheritance, and the consequences of making assumptions about other people's property based on incomplete information and wishful thinking. And my son was about to learn that dishonesty about family assets could cost him everything he'd been taking for granted, including the mother whose life's work he'd been planning to commercialize without her knowledge or consent. The sound of another bottle crashing came from the direction of the main terrace, followed by drunken laughter that cut through the evening air like breaking glass. I turned to see 3 of Madison's college friends standing over what appeared to be the shattered remains of a bottle I couldn't identify from this distance, giggling as they attempted to pour wine from an obviously empty container. "Oh my God, it's like totally empty!" one of them shrieked. "Madison, your future mother-in-law needs to stock better wine. This bottle didn't even have anything good in it." "That's because you held it upside down, Brittany," another replied. "You literally poured a whole bottle onto the ground." Madison's face went ashen as she watched her friends destroy what might have been another irreplaceable vintage, while I felt something cold and final settle in my chest as I realized the extent of the evening's carnage was still revealing itself. "I'll be right back," I said quietly, walking toward the group of women who were now attempting to open another bottle with what appeared to be a butter knife from the catering setup. "Excuse me," I said as I approached them, my voice carrying the authority that 25 years of running a business had taught me to project when necessary. "Oh hey, wine lady," Brittany called out cheerfully. "We need some help getting this bottle open. The cork is like super stuck." Wine lady. As if I were sommelier hired for the evening rather than the woman whose property they were systematically destroying. "What bottle did you just break?" "I don't know, some old dusty thing from the basement. Madison said to grab whatever looked expensive because she wanted to impress her finance friends from the city." My heart stopped as I looked down at the label fragment that remained legible among the broken glass. Margaux 1953. Chateau Margaux 1953. One of 6 bottles Richard and I had purchased for our 20th wedding anniversary, representing one of the greatest Bordeaux vintages of the 20th century. The bottle had been worth approximately $15,000, and these women had just poured it onto my terrace stones while laughing about my inadequate wine selection. "Did Madison specifically tell you to take bottles from the cellar?" She said her future mother-in-law was like super generous about sharing wine, and that we should help ourselves to anything that looked good because there was tons of expensive stuff down there. Future mother-in-law who was super generous about sharing wine. I walked back toward Derek and Madison with the kind of calm that comes from shock so profound it creates its own emotional numbness. Around me, the engagement party continued with increasingly chaotic energy as guests who'd been drinking wine worth more than their monthly salaries began exhibiting the effects of alcohol consumption combined with the entertainment value of watching a family implode in real time. "Derek," I said quietly as I rejoined the group near the wine cellar. Madison told her friends that I was generous about sharing wine and that they should help themselves to anything expensive from my collection. "What?" Madison spun around with horror written across her face. "I never said that. Brittany just told me you specifically instructed her to take bottles from the cellar because I was generous about sharing and there were tons of expensive bottles available. That's not... I might have said you were generous, but I didn't tell anyone to raid your wine collection." "Madison," Derek said wearily, "what exactly did you tell your friends about Mom's wine?" "I told them your mother had a really impressive collection and that she'd probably be happy to share some nice bottles for your engagement party." "Based on what evidence?" I asked. "When have I ever indicated that my vintage collection was available for casual consumption? You've always been so welcoming when Derek and I visit for dinner, and you always serve wine with meals." "I serve wine with meals. I don't serve rare vintages worth thousands of dollars per bottle." "How was I supposed to know the difference? Derek, you said your mom enjoyed sharing her wine hobby with people." Derek looked like a man who just realized that every attempt to minimize or deflect responsibility was making his situation progressively worse. "Madison, I said Mom enjoyed talking about wine with people who were interested in learning about viticulture. I never said her collection was available for parties." "But you never said it wasn't available either." "Derek, you've been bringing me here for months, and your mother never once mentioned that some bottles were off limits or explained which wines were valuable." "Because," I said with growing anger, "I shouldn't need to post warning labels on my property to prevent guests from treating irreplaceable collectibles as party favors." "Mrs. Blackstone, I'm so sorry. I honestly didn't know. I thought... Derek always made it sound like everything here was just part of normal family life." "Normal family life?" I looked at my son with disbelief. "Derek, what kind of picture have you been painting of our lifestyle and finances?" Derek was quiet for a long moment before answering with obvious reluctance. "I may have given Madison the impression that our family was more casually wealthy than we actually are." "Casually wealthy?" I told her that the vineyard and wine collection represented family money rather than your personal business investment and professional achievement. Family money that just happened to exist without anyone working to create or maintain it? I wanted her to feel comfortable here without feeling intimidated by your success or achievements. So you portrayed my life's work as inherited luxury rather than earned accomplishment? Madison was listening to this exchange with growing horror as she realized the extent to which Derek had misrepresented our family's financial situation. Derek, you told me your family had old money and that the vineyard was just one of several properties your parents owned. You said your mother managed the wine collection as a hobby because she enjoyed entertaining. Old money? I repeated incredulously. Derek, you know perfectly well that your father and I built our wealth from nothing. You know I started this vineyard with a business loan and 20 years of 18-hour days learning viticulture while working full-time in agricultural consulting. I simplified the story to avoid complicated explanations about entrepreneurship and business development. You simplified the story by erasing my professional achievements and portraying me as a wealthy dilettante whose assets were available for your girlfriend's entertainment. Patricia Wells, who'd been listening to this conversation with journalistic fascination, approached with her notebook already open. Victoria, would you be willing to comment on the total estimated damage to your collection? I'm writing a piece about wine vandalism at private events. The total damage? I haven't completed my assessment yet, but preliminary estimates suggest they've destroyed approximately $60,000 in irreplaceable vintages. $60,000? Madison's voice was barely audible. And that's not including the bottles that were opened and consumed rather than destroyed through breakage. Mrs. Blackstone, Madison said desperately, Derek and I will pay for everything. We'll get loans, we'll sell our cars, whatever it takes. Madison, we don't have $60,000, Derek said quietly. We don't have anything close to $60,000. Some engagement parties end with happy couples planning their future together. This engagement party was ending with the destruction of a relationship built on lies about family wealth, while my son discovered that misrepresenting his mother's achievements could cost him access to the inheritance he'd been taking for granted. And I was learning that the woman I'd been tolerating as Derek's fiancée had spent 6 months planning to inherit my life's work based on completely false information about how wealth is created, maintained, and transferred between generations. The question now was whether any relationship could survive this level of deception and destruction, or whether some damage was too extensive to repair through apologies and promises to do better in the future. 20 minutes later, I stood in my wine cellar, conducting what felt like an archaeological survey of destruction, with Patricia Wells documenting the carnage for her article, while Derek and Madison followed behind us like mourners at a funeral they'd accidentally caused. The 1947 Chateau d'Yquem, the 1961 Chateau Latour, the 1943 Romanée Conti, the 1953 Chateau Margaux, I recited as I examined empty spaces on my custom-built storage racks, all gone. Plus what appears to be a 1970 Barolo that someone opened and abandoned, half-finished, on the tasting table. Mrs. Blackstone, Madison whispered, How much is everything that's been damaged? So far, approximately $85,000. But we haven't finished the inventory yet. Derek sank onto the small chair I kept in the cellar for meditation and reflection during particularly stressful harvest seasons, his head in his hands as the financial magnitude of the evening continued to expand beyond anything he could comprehend or afford. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. We don't have $85,000. We don't have anything close to that amount. Then perhaps you should have considered that possibility before encouraging Madison to treat my collection as party supplies. I never encouraged. Derek, you specifically told her I was generous about sharing wine and that the collection was part of family assets she could expect to inherit. How is that not encouragement? Madison was examining a bottle of 1982 Chateau Pichon Baron with the reverence of someone who just learned to distinguish between priceless artifacts and disposable objects. Mrs. Blackstone, would you be willing to accept payments over time? Like we could pay you monthly until the debt is covered? At your current combined income, monthly payments would take approximately 15 years to cover the existing damage. That's assuming no interest and no additional destruction while you're learning to handle family assets more responsibly. 15 years? Derek looked up with the expression of someone who just realized that financial mistakes could have consequences lasting decades. Mom, That would mean we couldn't afford to buy a house, start a family, or make any major purchases until we're in our 50s. Those are the natural consequences of destroying assets you can't afford to replace. Patricia Wells looked up from her notes with professional curiosity. Victoria, what's your plan for preventing this kind of situation in the future? Will you be restricting access to the collection during family events? I'm considering restricting access to the property during family events, or restricting access to the property by family members who've demonstrated they can't be trusted with valuable assets. You're thinking about banning Derek and Madison from the vineyard? I'm thinking about protecting my investment from people who've proven they'll treat irreplaceable items as disposable conveniences when it suits their social needs. Madison began crying. Not the dramatic tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the quiet, devastated crying of someone who just realized the extent of their mistakes and their inability to fix them. Mrs. Blackstone, please. I know I messed up terribly, but Derek and I love each other, and we want to be part of this family. Isn't there some way to make this right? Madison, what exactly do you love about Derek? And what kind of family do you want to be part of? What do you mean? I mean that you've spent 6 months believing Derek was inheriting a multi-million-dollar property and planning your lifestyle around that assumption. You've treated me like hired help while expecting to benefit from my hospitality and assets. So I'm curious about your feelings for Derek, independent of the financial advantages you thought this relationship would provide. Mrs. Blackstone, I genuinely care about Derek. I'm not with him for money. But you spent this evening calculating the commercial potential of converting my vineyard into a wedding venue. You've been researching property values and renovation costs. You've been planning to profit from assets that belong to me. Because Derek told me we'd inherit them eventually. I was trying to be responsible about financial planning for our future. Financial planning based on inheriting wealth you hadn't earned from someone whose professional achievements you'd never bothered to understand or respect. Derek stood up from his chair with the defeated posture of someone who'd exhausted all strategies for minimizing his responsibility. Mom, what do you want from us? What would it take to rebuild your trust and repair our relationship? Derek, I want honesty. I want accountability. I want evidence that you understand the difference between entitled assumptions and earned privileges. What does that mean practically? It means acknowledging that inheritance isn't automatic. It means demonstrating respect for my work and my property. It means showing me that you value our relationship for reasons that have nothing to do with what you might eventually inherit. And if we can't pay for the wine damage immediately, then you'll live with debt that reflects the cost of your poor judgment, and you'll learn that some mistakes have consequences that can't be eliminated through apologies or payment plans. Madison wiped her eyes and looked at me with what appeared to be genuine remorse rather than calculated sympathy-seeking. Mrs. Blackstone, what would I need to do to earn your forgiveness? Not for Derek's sake, but because I genuinely want to make things right between us. Madison, you'd need to demonstrate that you understand why your behavior was inappropriate, that you're willing to treat me with respect regardless of what you think I can offer you, and that you're capable of building relationships based on mutual regard rather than perceived advantage. How do I demonstrate those things? By changing your behavior consistently over time, not by making promises you might not keep when the immediate crisis passes. Patricia Wells closed her notebook and looked around the wine cellar with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed a master class in family dysfunction. Victoria, this is quite a story. Family inheritance expectations, social class assumptions, asset destruction through ignorance. There are multiple angles here beyond just wine vandalism. Feel free to write about whatever aspects seem relevant to your readership. Even the family dynamics and inheritance issues, especially those. Maybe other families can learn from our example about the importance of honest communication and realistic expectations about wealth transfer. Derek and Madison exchanged glances that suggested they were both beginning to understand that their private family crisis was about to become a public case study in how not to handle intergenerational wealth and family relationships. Mom, Derek said quietly, are you really going to let Patricia publish details about our personal financial situation? Derek, you've spent 6 months treating our personal financial situation as if it were Madison's inheritance planning opportunity. If you're comfortable enough with our family assets to make assumptions about inheriting them, you should be comfortable enough to have those assumptions publicly examined. Some family arguments remain private and get resolved through quiet conversation and mutual compromise. This family argument was about to become public education about the dangers of assuming that wealth transfers automatically between generations and that respect can be purchased through inheritance expectations rather than earned through genuine relationship building. And my son was about to learn that some conversations can't be avoided indefinitely, and that dishonesty about family dynamics can have consequences that extend far beyond immediate embarrassment. The engagement party officially ended at 10:47 p.m., when the last of Madison's friends finally ran out of expensive wine to destroy and expensive food to waste, leaving my terraces littered with the detritus of what had been intended as a celebration, but had devolved into an inadvertent liquidation of my life's most precious possessions. Derek and Madison remained behind to help with cleanup, though their assistance consisted primarily of standing around looking devastated while the catering staff efficiently dismantled the elaborate setup that had cost them the equivalent of a luxury car down payment. "Mrs. Blackstone," Madison said, as she watched servers collecting crystal glasses that had somehow survived the evening's carnage. "What happens now? I mean, beyond the financial debt and the family damage? What do you mean? I mean, are Derek and I still welcome here? Are we still invited to family events? Are we still family?" The question hung in the cool evening air while I considered how to answer honestly without being unnecessarily cruel to a young woman who was genuinely beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistakes. "Madison, that depends on several factors that won't be resolved tonight or even this month." "What factors?" "Whether you and Derek can demonstrate that you've learned from this experience, whether you can rebuild trust that's been severely damaged, whether you can accept that relationships with me are based on mutual respect rather than inheritance expectations. And if we can't demonstrate those things, then you'll discover that some relationships don't survive certain kinds of betrayal and deception." Derek looked up from the chair where he'd been sitting in stunned silence since we'd completed the wine cellar inventory. "Mom, are you saying you might cut me off entirely? That I might lose you as well as any potential inheritance? I'm saying that relationships require ongoing effort to maintain, and that some damage takes years to repair if it can be repaired at all. But I'm your son. Doesn't that count for something? Derek, being my son means you had certain advantages and opportunities that other people didn't have. It doesn't mean you're entitled to forgiveness for betraying my trust and enabling someone to treat me as disposable help while planning to profit from my life's work. I never thought of it as betrayal. What would you call allowing your fiancé to humiliate your mother for 6 months rather than having an honest conversation about family dynamics and property ownership?" Derek was quiet for a long time before answering. "I'd call it cowardice and selfishness, and probably the worst mistake I've ever made." "Probably?" "Definitely the worst mistake I've ever made." The admission carried more weight than his previous attempts at apologizing because it acknowledged responsibility rather than seeking to minimize consequences. "Derek, why did you let Madison believe I was hired help rather than the property owner?" Because I was embarrassed about living in my mother's shadow. Because I wanted her to see me as successful and independent rather than as someone whose lifestyle depended on family money. Except that your lifestyle does depend on family money. You work as a financial consultant making $60,000 a year, but you drive a car worth $40,000, live in an apartment that costs $3,000 monthly, and take vacations that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Because you've been supplementing my income since college, and you've never acknowledged that financial support to Madison? I told her I was good at managing money and had made some smart investments. Madison stared at Derek with growing comprehension of how extensive his deceptions had been. "Derek, you told me you were financially independent. You said you'd built wealth through careful planning and investment strategy. I never technically lied." "You absolutely lied, Derek. I've been dating you for 2 years thinking you were a successful financial professional who'd achieved security through your own abilities." "Madison, I am a financial professional who lives on family money while pretending to be self-sufficient. Derek, do you realize how this makes me look? I've been bragging to my friends about dating someone who had his life together financially, when actually you're a 35-year-old man whose mother pays his bills." "She doesn't pay my bills exactly." "Derek," I interrupted, "I've transferred $18,000 into your account this year to cover expenses that exceed your salary. How is that different from paying your bills? Madison sat down heavily on one of the remaining chairs, apparently overwhelmed by the scope of the deception she was still discovering. So, neither of us is financially independent. Neither of us actually has the resources to afford the lifestyle we've been living. And neither of us has been honest with the other about our real financial situation. What do you mean you're not financially independent? Derek asked. Derek, I'm an Instagram influencer with 40,000 followers. I make maybe $20,000 a year from sponsorships and affiliate marketing. My lifestyle depends entirely on my parents' financial support. Your parents support you financially? They pay my rent, my car payment, and most of my living expenses because social media income isn't consistent or reliable. Derek stared at Madison with the expression of someone who just realized that his financial deceptions weren't unique in their relationship. So, we're both financially dependent on our parents, but we've each been pretending to be independent and successful? Apparently so. I listened to this exchange with a mixture of frustration and sadness as I realized that Derek and Madison's relationship was built on layers of deception that extended far beyond their treatment of my property and wine collection. Derek, Madison, do either of you have any idea what your actual combined annual income is? Maybe 80,000? Derek guessed. Between legitimate earnings, yes. But your combined annual expenses are approximately $160,000, which means your lifestyle requires nearly $80,000 in family subsidies that neither of you has acknowledged to the other. So we're living entirely beyond our means, Madison said quietly. You're living entirely beyond your independent means. Your lifestyle depends on family financial support that you've both hidden from each other, while making assumptions about inheriting additional wealth. And now we owe you $85,000 that we have no realistic way to pay. Correct. Madison looked around at the remnants of the engagement party that had cost them more than either of them earned annually, while revealing the financial instability that undermined all their future plans. Mrs. Blackstone, what would happen if Derek and I called off our engagement? Would that affect the debt situation or our relationship with your family? The question surprised Derek, who turned to stare at Madison with alarm. Madison, why would we call off our engagement? Because our entire relationship is apparently built on lies about money, success, and family assets. Because we've destroyed your mother's trust and created financial obligations we can't meet. Because maybe we don't actually know each other well enough to make lifetime commitments. Some engagement parties end with couples feeling more confident about their future together. This engagement party was ending with two people discovering that they'd built their relationship on mutual deceptions about financial independence, while creating debt that would define their economic reality for the next decade. And I was beginning to understand that the problem wasn't just Madison's disrespectful behavior or Derek's dishonesty about property ownership, but a fundamental lack of authentic communication about values, expectations, and realistic plans for building sustainable adult lives together. The question now was whether any of us could rebuild trust from such a foundation of deception, or whether some relationships were too damaged by dishonesty to survive the transition to authentic communication. 2 weeks after the engagement party disaster, I sat in my office reviewing the final damage assessment with my accountant, Robert Sterling, while Derek and Madison waited in my vineyard's tasting room for what had become an unavoidable family meeting about consequences, restitution, and the future of our relationships. The total verified losses come to $93,400, Robert announced, sliding the detailed inventory across my desk. That includes the fair market value of destroyed wines based on recent auction results, plus assessment fees for determining authenticity and condition of remaining bottles. $93,400, I repeated, the number feeling both abstract and devastating, as I contemplated the irreplaceable nature of what had been lost. Victoria, I have to ask, do Derek and Madison have any realistic ability to pay this amount? Their combined legitimate annual income is approximately $80,000, and their current living expenses exceed $160,000 annually with family subsidies. So they're functionally insolvent even before accounting for this debt. Correct. What are your options for recovery? Legally, I could pursue full restitution through civil court. Practically, I could restructure the debt with realistic payment terms, or I could absorb the loss as an expensive lesson about family trust and asset protection. And personally, Robert's question hit the core of what I'd been wrestling with for 2 weeks. The financial loss was devastating but manageable given my overall asset portfolio. The emotional betrayal was more complex and potentially more costly in terms of family relationships and future peace of mind. Personally, I'm trying to determine whether my son and his fiancée are capable of learning from this experience or whether this is simply who they are when they think actions don't have consequences. And if they're not capable of learning, then I'll protect my remaining assets and minimize my exposure to future exploitation. I walked from my office to the tasting room, where Derek and Madison sat at the small table I typically used for educational wine tastings with serious collectors, both looking like defendants waiting for sentencing. "Have you had time to review the damage assessment?" I asked, settling into the chair across from them. "We've reviewed it," Derek replied quietly. "Mom, we honestly had no idea the collection was that valuable." "Derek, you've lived in this house for visits and holidays for 5 years since Madison and I began dating. You've seen me treat those wines with extraordinary care. You've watched me maintain climate control, security systems, and detailed inventory records. What did you think all that effort was protecting? I thought you were being overly cautious about sentimental items that had emotional value, but weren't necessarily worth much financially." Madison looked up from the assessment papers with red-rimmed eyes that suggested she'd been crying intermittently for 2 weeks. "Mrs. Blackstone, Derek and I have been talking about our options, and we want to do the right thing, but we honestly don't know what that means given our financial situation. What options have you considered? We could take out loans to pay the full amount immediately, but the monthly payments would be more than our combined rent and car payments. We could extend payment over many years, but that would prevent us from buying a house, starting a family, or making any major financial commitments until we're middle-aged. Or we could—" Madison hesitated, glancing at Derek before continuing. "We could call off our engagement and accept that we're not ready for marriage or adult financial responsibility." The third option surprised me because it suggested a level of self-awareness I hadn't expected from either of them. "Madison, why would calling off your engagement be relevant to the debt situation? Because maybe the debt isn't our only problem. Maybe we're not ready to build a life together if we've been lying to each other about our financial situations and making assumptions about inheritance that we never verified." Derek looked stricken. "Madison, we can work through the financial issues. We don't have to end our engagement because of money problems." "Derek, it's not just money problems. We've both been living beyond our means while pretending to be financially independent. We've made plans based on inheriting your mother's assets without understanding their value or earning the right to them. We've demonstrated that we don't communicate honestly about important topics. But we love each other. Do we? Or do we love the versions of each other that we've been pretending to be?" I watched this conversation between Derek and Madison with the recognition that they were having the honest discussion about their relationship that they should have had before planning an engagement party, let alone a marriage. "Derek, Madison, let me ask you both something," I interrupted. "Setting aside the debt situation temporarily, do you believe your relationship is built on authentic understanding of who you actually are and what you realistically want from life?" Derek and Madison looked at each other with expressions that suggested they'd been avoiding this question for weeks. "I'm not sure," Derek admitted. "I've been so focused on trying to impress Madison that I haven't been honest about my financial dependence or my uncertainty about my career direction. And I've been so focused on building an Instagram lifestyle that I haven't been honest about my own financial situation or my doubts about whether I actually want the kind of marriage and family life we've been planning." "What kind of marriage and family life have you been planning? Traditional upper-middle-class lifestyle with a house, children, and social status based on financial success that neither of us has actually achieved independently. And what kind of life do you actually want?" "I don't know," Madison said quietly. "I've been so busy trying to appear successful on social media that I've never really considered what would make me genuinely happy versus what would make good content for my followers." Derek nodded in agreement. "And I've been so focused on trying to maintain the appearance of success that I've never figured out what kind of career or lifestyle would actually suit my abilities and interests." "So you're both questioning whether you know yourselves well enough to make lifetime commitments to each other?" "Yes," they said simultaneously. I sat back in my chair, feeling both relieved and sad, as I realized that Derek and Madison were demonstrating more maturity in questioning their relationship than they had in planning their future together. What are you thinking about doing with these realizations? We're thinking about taking a break from planning the wedding and focusing on figuring out who we actually are and what we actually want from our individual lives before trying to build something together, Madison replied. And regarding the debt situation? Derek spoke up with more decisiveness than he'd shown since the engagement party. Mom, we want to pay you back, but we also want to do it in a way that forces us to live within our actual means and learn to be financially responsible adults. What would that look like? We're thinking about moving back in with our respective parents, taking second jobs, and using all additional income for restitution until the debt is paid. That would take approximately 8 years based on realistic projections of your earning capacity. We know, but maybe that's what we need. 8 years to grow up and figure out whether we're compatible as actual adults rather than as people pretending to be more successful than we really are. Some family crises end with quick resolutions and promises to do better in the future. This family crisis was ending with recognition that fundamental problems required fundamental changes that would take years to implement and prove sustainable. And for the first time since the engagement party, I felt hopeful that Derek and Madison might actually be capable of learning from their mistakes, rather than simply trying to minimize the consequences of poor judgment. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated wine cellar that now featured state-of-the-art security systems, temperature controls, and access restrictions that would prevent future catastrophes like the engagement party disaster. Derek knocked on the reinforced glass door, holding the monthly payment envelope that had become our routine since he'd moved back to his childhood bedroom and taken a second job delivering food on weekends. "Come in," I called, noting that he looked healthier and more grounded than he had in years, despite the obvious stress of working 60 hours a week to pay for his mistakes. "Here's this month's payment," he said, setting the envelope on my tasting table. $800. Madison's contribution is included. How are the living arrangements working out? Better than I expected, honestly. Living with Dad again has been humbling but educational. I'd forgotten how much work goes into maintaining a household when you're not getting financial assistance for everything. Derek's father, my ex-husband Thomas, had been surprisingly supportive when Derek explained the situation and asked to move home temporarily. Their relationship had improved significantly as they worked together on practical life skills that Derek had never learned during his years of subsidized independence. And Madison? She moved back to Portland with her parents and took a job at a marketing firm. Real job, regular hours, health insurance. She says it's the first time she's felt like an actual adult instead of someone playing dress-up with other people's money. I opened the envelope and checked the contents. $800 in cash, plus a handwritten note that had become Madison's monthly tradition of acknowledging responsibility and documenting progress toward financial independence. "How much have you paid toward the debt so far?" $4,800, which means only $88,600 to go. Derek's laugh was rueful but not bitter. "At this rate, we'll be debt-free sometime around my 43rd birthday. How does that feel?" Honest. For the first time in my adult life, I know exactly how much money I make, exactly how much my expenses are, and exactly what I can afford without family assistance. And Madison? She's thriving, actually. Her Instagram following has grown because she started posting about financial reality instead of fake luxury lifestyle content. Turns out, people are interested in authentic stories about learning to manage money and live within your means. The transformation in both Derek and Madison over 6 months had been remarkable to observe. Stripped of family financial support and forced to live with the consequences of their choices, they'd both developed work ethics, budgeting skills, and realistic perspectives that had been completely absent during their years of subsidized pseudo-success. "Derek, what have you learned about yourself during this process? That I'm actually capable of working hard and managing money responsibly when I don't have safety nets that enable poor decisions. That I was using your financial support as an excuse to avoid developing adult life skills. And about your relationship with Madison? That we barely knew each other when we got engaged, and that most of our compatibility was based on shared assumptions about lifestyle and money that weren't grounded in reality. Are you still planning to get married eventually?" Derek was quiet for a moment, considering his answer with the thoughtfulness that had become characteristic of his communication style since moving home and starting therapy to address his financial and emotional dependency issues. We're not planning anything long-term right now. We're focused on becoming the kind of people who would be capable of building a healthy marriage if that's what we decide we want. What does that mean practically? It means learning to be honest about our feelings, our goals, and our capabilities. It means developing individual identities that don't depend on other people's financial support or social validation. It means proving to ourselves and each other that we can handle adult responsibilities independently. And romantically? We talk once a week and visit every few months, but we're not trying to maintain a traditional romantic relationship while we're both focused on personal development. The approach surprised me because it demonstrated patience and long-term thinking that neither Derek nor Madison had shown during their original engagement planning. How do your respective parents feel about this arrangement? Dad thinks it's the most mature decision I've made since college. Madison's parents are relieved that she's finally learning practical life skills instead of depending on social media income and family subsidies. And emotionally, how are you handling the uncertainty about your future together? Better than I handled the certainty about a future that was built on deception and unrealistic expectations. I'd rather not know what will happen with Madison than pretend we were ready for marriage when we obviously weren't. I walked to the wine storage area where I kept my remaining vintage collection, noting the satisfaction I felt knowing that every bottle was now properly secured against casual destruction by people who couldn't distinguish between priceless artifacts and party refreshments. Derek, I want to show you something. I selected a bottle of 1985 Chateau Margaux, excellent wine but not irreplaceable, and placed it on the tasting table. This bottle is worth approximately $400, not as expensive as the wines that were destroyed during your engagement party, but still significant enough that it represents careful consideration before opening. Why are you showing me this? Because I want to offer you and Madison an opportunity to share a truly excellent wine as recognition for the progress you've both made toward financial responsibility and personal maturity. Derek stared at the bottle as if it might explode if handled improperly. Mom, I can't afford to replace this wine if something happens to it. I'm not asking you to replace it. I'm offering to share it with you because you've demonstrated that you understand the difference between consumption and appreciation. What's the difference? Consumption is using something because you can. Appreciation is valuing something because you understand its significance and rarity. And you think Madison and I have learned to appreciate rather than consume? I think you've learned that some experiences have value that can't be measured in social media posts or status symbols. That some pleasures are worth waiting for and preparing for rather than demanding immediate gratification. Derek reached toward the bottle tentatively, then pulled his hand back. Actually, Mom, I'd like to wait. Maybe until Madison and I have paid off more of our debt, or until we've proven that we can maintain financial responsibility for a longer period. Why wait? Because I want to earn the right to share something this special with you. I want to be someone who deserves to participate in experiences that represent your trust and generosity. The response moved me more than Derek's monthly payments or his progress toward financial independence, because it demonstrated internal changes that went beyond external compliance with debt obligations. Derek, that's exactly the kind of judgment that suggests you're developing the maturity that inheritance requires. Does that mean? It means that inheritance isn't just about financial assets. It's about wisdom, responsibility, and the capacity to value what matters most. And do you think I'm developing those qualities? I think you're becoming someone I'd be proud to trust with assets that represent decades of work and careful stewardship. Some family relationships are repaired through apologies and promises to do better. Our family relationship was being rebuilt through sustained demonstration that Derek was capable of growth, accountability, and appreciation for opportunities that he'd previously taken for granted. And for the first time since the engagement party, I felt confident that my son might eventually become someone worthy of the trust and responsibility that real inheritance requires. 1 year and 3 days after the engagement party disaster, I received an unexpected call from Madison while I was reviewing harvest reports in my office. Her number hadn't appeared on my phone since the monthly payment schedule had been established, and I felt a mixture of curiosity and concern as I answered. Mrs. Blackstone, it's Madison. I hope it's okay that I'm calling you directly. Of course it's okay, Madison. How are you doing? Really well, actually. Better than I've been in years, honestly. I wanted to talk to you about something important, but I wasn't sure if I should go through Derek or contact you myself. What's on your mind? I've been offered a promotion at my marketing firm that would require relocating to their Seattle office. It's a significant salary increase and real career advancement, but it would mean moving further away from Derek and potentially changing whatever our relationship is right now. The news surprised me because it suggested Madison was being presented with choices about her individual future rather than continuing to plan her life around her relationship with Derek. How do you feel about the opportunity? Excited and terrified. Excited because it represents real professional growth based on my actual performance rather than social media following or family connections. Terrified because it would mean making a major life decision independently. And how does Derek feel about it? That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Derek thinks I should take the promotion because it represents the kind of career progress we've both been working toward. But I'm concerned about making such a big decision without understanding how it might affect our family situation. What family situation? The debt situation, the rebuilding trust situation, the possibility that Derek and I might eventually want to rebuild our romantic relationship. I appreciated Madison's directness in acknowledging the complexity of factors she was considering, rather than pretending the decision was purely professional. Madison, what would taking this promotion mean for your monthly payments toward the debt? Actually, the salary increase would allow me to double my monthly contribution. I could pay $400 monthly instead of $200, which would reduce the total repayment timeline significantly. And what would it mean for your relationship with Derek? Honestly, we don't know. We've been rebuilding our friendship and individual stability for a year, but we haven't tested whether our connection can survive geographical distance or major life changes. What does your instinct tell you about that? Madison was quiet for nearly 30 seconds before responding. My instinct tells me that if our relationship can't survive me accepting a career opportunity that improves my financial stability and professional development, then it probably wasn't built on the right foundation anyway. The insight impressed me because it suggested Madison had developed perspective about relationship dynamics that had been completely absent during her engagement planning. Madison, what would you like from me regarding this decision? I'd like your opinion about whether accepting this promotion would interfere with the trust rebuilding process we've been working on this year. Why does my opinion matter to your career decision? Because I've learned that your trust and respect matter more to me than I realized when I was treating you like hired help. Because I want to make decisions that demonstrate the kind of person I'm becoming rather than the person I was during the engagement party. The honesty in Madison's response moved me more than I'd expected, particularly because it suggested she was considering my feelings as a factor in her life planning rather than simply fulfilling minimum obligations. Madison, what kind of person are you becoming? Someone who values authentic achievements over social media appearances. Someone who understands the difference between earning respect and demanding it. Someone who takes responsibility for mistakes and works to repair damage rather than making excuses. And taking this promotion would demonstrate those qualities how? By choosing career advancement that I've earned through actual performance, rather than staying geographically close to preserve a relationship that might not be ready for major challenges yet. What does Derek think about your perspective on your relationship readiness? He agrees that we should prioritize individual development over relationship maintenance right now. We both want to become people who would be capable of building something healthy together, if that's what we ultimately decide to pursue. But you're not certain that's what you'll ultimately decide to pursue? We're not certain about anything long-term, which feels much healthier than the false certainty we had when we got engaged without really knowing each other. I found myself impressed by Madison's emotional maturity and realistic assessment of her situation with Derek, particularly because it contrasted sharply with the entitled assumptions and romantic fantasies that had characterized her previous decision-making. Madison, I think accepting this promotion would demonstrate exactly the kind of judgment and priority setting that builds trust rather than undermining it. Really? Really? You're choosing professional growth and financial responsibility over relationship convenience. You're making decisions based on long-term stability rather than short-term emotional comfort. And if it means Derek and I grow apart or realize we're not compatible across distance, Then you'll have learned something important about your relationship before making lifetime commitments that would be much more complicated to unravel. Madison laughed with what sounded like relief rather than amusement. Mrs. Blackstone, a year ago I would have expected Derek to turn down this kind of opportunity if it interfered with our relationship plans. Now I think I'd lose respect for him if he asked me to prioritize his convenience over my career advancement. That's significant personal growth. It feels like finally growing up, which is embarrassing to admit at 29 but also liberating. Madison, what would you like from me in terms of supporting this decision? I'd like you to know that I'm not running away from responsibility or trying to escape the consequences of the engagement party. I'm trying to make choices that demonstrate the kind of person who deserves trust and respect rather than someone who just promises to do better. I appreciate that distinction. And I'd like Derek to know that you support decisions that prioritize individual growth and financial responsibility, even when they create uncertainty about relationship futures. I can definitely communicate that to Derek. Mrs. Blackstone, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you think there's a possibility that Derek and I might eventually rebuild enough trust and compatibility to have a healthy relationship, or do you think some damage can't be repaired? The question required honesty about observations I'd been making over the past year regarding Derek and Madison's individual development and their interactions during their monthly visits. Madison, I think both of you have demonstrated capacity for significant positive change. Whether that change makes you more compatible with each other or helps you realize you want different things from life remains to be seen. And you're okay with either outcome? I'm most interested in both of you becoming people who can build healthy relationships with partners who appreciate their authentic selves rather than their potential inheritance prospects. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Some family relationships are rebuilt through careful management of expectations and gradual restoration of trust. Our family relationship was being strengthened through honest communication about difficult decisions and mutual respect for individual growth over convenience or tradition. And for the first time since the engagement party, I felt confident that both Derek and Madison were becoming people who could be trusted with important choices about their futures, regardless of whether those futures included each other. 2 years after the engagement party, I stood in my reconstructed wine cellar admiring the new vintage collection I'd been carefully building to replace what had been lost when Derek knocked on the security door carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing the expression of someone with important news to share. Mom, do you have a few minutes? I wanted to talk to you about something significant. Of course, come in. He entered the climate-controlled space with the reverence he'd learned to show for irreplaceable things, setting the champagne bottle on my tasting table with careful precision. What's the occasion? Madison got promoted again. She's now the marketing director for the entire Pacific Northwest region, and her salary has increased enough that we can accelerate our debt payments significantly. That's wonderful news. How much acceleration are we talking about? We can pay $1,500 monthly instead of $800, which would clear our debt in approximately 4 years instead of 8. The practical improvement was substantial, but I was more interested in Derek's emotional response to Madison's continued professional success. How do you feel about Madison's career advancement? Proud of her. Genuinely proud. She's built something real and sustainable through her own abilities, and she's doing work that she finds meaningful rather than just posting lifestyle content for social media validation. And how do you feel about your own career development? Derek smiled with the confidence that had gradually replaced his previous insecurity and defensiveness about professional achievement. I've been promoted to senior consultant, and I've started specializing in helping people recover from financial mistakes. Turns out having personal experience with debt and dependency issues makes me more effective at helping clients develop realistic financial strategies. So you're both building careers that utilize lessons learned from your mistakes? Exactly. Madison helps companies develop authentic marketing strategies instead of fake lifestyle branding, and I help people create sustainable financial plans instead of maintaining appearances they can't afford. And personally, how are you both doing individually? Better than we've ever been. We've each developed identities and capabilities that don't depend on other people's money or validation. We know who we are and what we want from life. Which brings me to why I wanted to talk to you today. Derek's expression shifted to something more serious as he gestured toward the champagne bottle. Madison and I have been discussing our future together, and we've made some decisions about our relationship. I felt a mixture of curiosity and concern, wondering whether 2 years of individual growth had brought them closer together or helped them realize they wanted different things from life. What kind of decisions? We've decided to get married, not immediately, and not with the kind of elaborate celebration we planned before, but eventually, when our debt is paid, and we've proven we can maintain financial stability independently. The announcement surprised me because I'd assumed their relationship was drifting toward friendship rather than romantic reconciliation. What changed your minds about marriage? We realized that we actually know and like each other now, instead of being attracted to versions of each other that we'd invented to avoid dealing with reality. And you're confident that this attraction is based on authentic compatibility rather than shared trauma from the engagement party disaster? Derek laughed with genuine amusement rather than defensiveness. We've tested our relationship under geographical separation, financial stress, family scrutiny, and individual career pressures. If we were going to discover fundamental incompatibilities, we would have found them by now. What does eventually mean in terms of timeline? We want to pay off our debt completely, maintain financial stability for at least 1 year afterward, and save enough money to pay for our own wedding without family assistance. So approximately 5 to 6 years from now? Yes, which gives us time to continue growing individually and building the kind of partnership that could actually sustain a lifetime commitment. I examined Derek's expression for signs of the entitlement, impatience, or unrealistic expectations that had characterized his previous approach to major life decisions, but found only thoughtful determination and genuine affection when he mentioned Madison. Derek, what's different about your feelings for Madison now compared to 2 years ago? 2 years ago, I was attracted to the idea of having a successful, beautiful girlfriend who made me look good socially. Now I respect and admire the person she's become through her own efforts, and I enjoy spending time with her because of who she actually is, rather than how she makes me appear. And how does Madison feel about you? She says she's attracted to my honesty and work ethic, and that she trusts me to make decisions based on long-term stability rather than short-term gratification. Trust. That's significant, given the foundation of deception your relationship started with. We've rebuilt trust by demonstrating consistency between our stated values and our actual behavior over extended time periods. What values are you referring to? Financial responsibility, honest communication, mutual respect for individual goals and achievements, and willingness to prioritize relationship health over social expectations or family pressure. Derek's description of their rebuilt relationship impressed me because it suggested they'd learned to value partnership over performance and authenticity over appearances. Derek, what are you hoping for from me regarding your future marriage plans? I'm hoping for your blessing, not your financial assistance, not your property as wedding venue, just your approval of Madison as someone worthy of joining our family permanently. And if I'm not ready to offer that blessing, then we'll continue working to earn your trust and respect until you feel confident that we've demonstrated the maturity that family membership requires. No pressure, no ultimatums, no demands for immediate acceptance, none. We understand that trust has to be earned gradually through sustained demonstration of good judgment, not demanded based on romantic feelings or family obligations. I walked to my wine storage area and selected a bottle of 1990 Chateau Pichon Baron, excellent wine that represented celebration rather than investment-level rarity. Derek, I'd like to open this wine to celebrate Madison's promotion and your engagement announcement. Are you sure? That bottle looks expensive. This bottle costs approximately $200, expensive enough to represent special occasions, affordable enough that sharing it won't create financial stress for anyone involved. And you're comfortable opening it for this occasion? I'm comfortable sharing it with people who understand the difference between celebration and consumption, and who have proven they can appreciate special experiences without demanding them. Derek smiled as he watched me prepare the wine with careful attention to proper serving temperature and glassware. Mom, what convinced you that Madison and I deserve to share something this special with you? You've both demonstrated that you understand the value of things that can't be replaced, and that you're willing to work for what you want rather than expecting it to be provided automatically. My son made an $80,000 engagement party at my vineyard, but never told his fiancée that I owned the property. She treated me like just the gardener, opened my vintage wine cellar, and served $10,000 bottles to guests while mocking dusty old wine. When she declared she'd transform our future property into a commercial venue, I revealed that the gardener was actually the owner of everything, The 120-acre vineyard, the $2.8 million wine collection, and the $93,000 worth of irreplaceable vintages she just destroyed through ignorance and entitlement. Sometimes the most expensive lessons teach the most valuable wisdom. At 64, I was no longer the woman whose son's fiancé had dismissed as hired help while destroying priceless family assets. I was Victoria Blackstone, vineyard owner who taught two young people that respect must be earned through character rather than demanded through inheritance expectations, and that some relationships can survive catastrophic mistakes if both parties are willing to do the work of becoming worthy of trust. The wine that Derek and Madison had destroyed during their engagement party had been irreplaceable, but the people they'd become through facing the consequences of that destruction were infinitely more valuable than any vintage in my collection. And every time I watched them make decisions based on long-term wisdom rather than immediate gratification, I felt grateful that their spectacular failure as entitled young adults had created the opportunity for them to develop into people worthy of the family legacy they'd once assumed they could inherit without effort. Some inheritance is financial. Some inheritance is wisdom. The best inheritance is the character to steward both responsibly. Derek and Madison were finally earning the right to both. The end.